Let me present you the latest economic outlook of Lithuania, and today's topic is cold winds blowing from the east, because the topic was chosen because of ongoing European Union and Russian economic sanction war and still escalating tensions in Ukraine, which might potentially undermine the economic growth of Lithuania in particular and the whole Baltic region in general. But first of all, let's start with the latest economic data. And the good news is that Lithuania, in spite of escalating tensions in Russia and still sluggish Eurozone economic growth, managed to achieve pretty robust economic growth in the first quarter of 2014, which was 3.1%, and 3% growth in the second quarter. So this was one of the fastest growing economies in the whole European Union. And growth was similar to that of Latvia, and also positive news is that Estonia, after first quarter slump, managed to reach growth above 2% in the second quarter. So this is good news. I have more good news, and this is that Lithuania, in terms of GDP per capita, measured in purchasing power standard, will outpace, or have already outpaced actually, Greece and Portugal, so old European Union countries, which marks very important thing that Eastern European countries start overcoming Western European countries in terms of GDP per capita. However, I should note that yes, this was pretty an easy task because we started from a very low levels, but now we reached relatively high, I would say, average GDP levels, and the further growth will be much more difficult than it was in the past. And yet another good news is that Lithuania is the first among the Baltic states to reach pre-crisis GDP levels, and it took 6 years to do it. Very few believed that it will manage to do this back in 2009-2010, when Lithuanian economy dropped by more than 15%, but after 6 years we are already back to our peak levels. And what is more important is that our economy is much more balanced now, less dependent on a credit boom, on construction sector, and with much more diversified export markets. So those are good news, and now let's move to see what factors are driving economic growth. And by far the most important is domestic consumption, which is forecasted to grow this year close to 5%. Next year, however, the growth will slow down a little bit, but still remain pretty robust. And the similar situation is in all Baltic states, in Latvia and Estonia. As you can see, domestic consumption is indeed the primary growth driver. And why it is the case? So first, very important thing is that real wage growth is positive, and it started to be positive only in 2013. So after 4 years of so-called belt tightening, and not only nominal growth wage is driving real wage growth, but also the falling inflation, which fell close to 0%. So we can see that this tendency is expected to continue, and we can expect that real wages will grow around 5% in 2014-2015. The second thing is that not only the wages are growing, but also the number of employees. So basically, economy creates new jobs, and in the past 3 years, Lithuania created close to 60,000 new jobs, so the employment, overall employment, is gradually rising. Okay, it's still far behind the pre-level peaks, mainly due to the pretty high immigration in post-crisis period. But if we look at the ratio of employment, we see that basically it's already approaching pre-crisis levels. And the third factor is housing market recovery, which accelerated especially in last year and this year, with prices of newly built apartments rising and number of newly built apartments are also increasing. So activity is rising in the real estate, prices are rising, not too much as it was in 2005, 2007. So this is pretty, I would say, decent real estate market developments. And this influences a lot our retail trade activities, since the growth in the sale of furniture and other home appliances is growing close to 30%. So this is again one of the key drivers. What is worrying is that recent data shows that consumer confidence deteriorated and fell to below -20%, basically due to two reasons. One is threat of further Russian sanctions and increasing fear that unemployment may rise if the situation will escalate further. And the second reason is that Lithuania will join Euro in 2015, and more than 40% of people, of consumers, expect that prices will rise very dramatically, I would say, in the upcoming 12-month period. However, as Latvian experience shows, this usually doesn't prove to be the case, and in Latvia prices actually increased only by 0.6% instead of expected very big numbers, and now only 10% of Latvian citizens expect a very high increase in prices. So we expect that this effect will fade as we will introduce Euro and that people start seeing that prices are not rising as fast as they feared. Actually, what they should be fearing is deflation instead of inflation, because we're joining Eurozone, in which the main issue now is deflation, not inflation. So I expect this to change, and if Russian crisis will de-escalate, so we can very expect the consumer confidence to stay pretty stable at pretty high levels. Exports, this used to be the main driving force behind GDP, especially in 2012, 2013, but 2014 we see negative growth. Basically, we expect it to be negative or close to zero in all Baltic states, with Lithuania having the biggest negative number, mainly because Lithuania is mostly dependent on Russia, and as a result of this, also in 2015 we expect a negative growth. So let's have a look at this graph. We see indeed that export growth to Russia, this graph on top, was higher than to other export destinations, and this will definitely not be the case in the upcoming months or even years due to the imposed sanctions and as a result of slowdown in Russian economy. So the overall exports will definitely slow down. And but if you look at the map of our exports, so we see that close to 1/3 of our exports go to the east, mostly to Russia. So this is the same proportion as exports going to the west, and slightly higher than going to the northern countries. This also compared to other markets which Lithuania has only a little bit under 10%, but this is a little bit misleading statistics, because most of exports to Russia are actually not exports of goods produced in Lithuania, but re-exports of goods from Western Europe to the east. So if we divide these exports into re-exports and exports of local produce, we see that re-exports constitute the vast majority of these exports, and they constitute total of a quarter of total Lithuanian exports, whereas local production exports constitutes only 5%. So the conclusion of this data is that if situation will deteriorate further and the Russian economy will experience recession, then the sector that will suffer most of this will be not our industry, not our manufacturers, but our transport sector that basically is involved in this west-east transit of goods. And this is actually can already be seen analyzing the graph of our industrial production growth. So as you can see, in spite of escalating tensions in Russia, confidence indicator is pretty stable. So it doesn't deteriorate contrary to the consumer confidence. And the growth of industrial production is double-digit at the moment, excluding the production of oil products, which is a little bit volatile. So usually we tend to exclude it when talking about Lithuania. So if we talk about overall effect of Russian sanctions on Lithuanian economy, we estimate that the direct effects will constitute a mere 0.8% of GDP. So this is, yes, this is significant impact, but it's not significant enough to force Lithuanian GDP into negative territory. So Lithuania will avoid economic recession, of course, given that there will be no more economic sanctions. And if you look at the sectors affected, we see that the exports to Russia that were banned of Lithuanian origin constitute 0.8% of GDP. So this is a little bit higher than in Latvia, Estonia, 0.6%, and a little bit higher than in Finland, but still it's below 1% in all countries, so the effect will not be very substantial. And especially given that it's not the first time that Lithuania experiences export bans from Russia. This graph shows the export of food products, the dynamics of export of food products to Russia, and we see that there were some big holes in it, big falls in exports. So first was in 2010 when Russia joined customs union and limited the exports of food products to Russia, but then we see that it recovered pretty fast, and end of last year Russia also banned all products, all imports of dairy products from Lithuania, so the export numbers fell to zero, but in the beginning of this year this restriction was lifted, so we see that it recovered pretty rapidly. And moreover, during this period of time, dairy exporters managed to find new markets pretty fast and diversified their export portfolio. So even like admitting that Russian sanctions will have some impact on Lithuanian economy in general and our dairy producers in particular, this should not be significant enough so as to derail the existing trends. So especially if we still talk about Lithuania, then we should remind ourselves that Lithuania is joining Eurozone in 2015, and the positive news again is that Lithuania managed to pretty much balance its budget, mainly due to expenditures that were more or less fixed, as you can see from this graph, whereas budget revenues increased. And if we exclude interest payments, so if we just look at primary balance, so that the year 2014 became the year where this balance became positive. So Lithuania now collects more revenues than it spends, excluding the interest payments. So this is a pretty nice achievement. So putting all these factors together, we still think that Lithuania will manage to grow pretty robustly. Growth, however, will slow down a little bit, but it will remain above 2% GDP levels. So it will be similar to the situation in Latvia, where again growth will slow down but still remain around 3%. And Estonia will recover next year from 2 years of very low growth and should manage to generate close to 3% economic growth. So in spite of Russian economic sanctions and in spite of challenges that Lithuania will face, according to our baseline scenario, Lithuania and the rest of the Baltic states should still keep positive growth. And 2016, we expect the situation to calm down and thus Lithuanian economic growth to accelerate. So thank you.